right. Welcome to episode 4 of Talk Commerce. This is where the music goes. Boo.
And do you actually have to do the music yourself?
Yeah,
Or...
that's we have a very low budget.
Okay, yeah.
Let's do it one more time. Welcome, and then you do the music this time. We'll see
I
who
don't
does
know
it
the
better.
music. Do you want me to just do some music?
I just made it up. I just because I was thinking of like some kind of newscast. So welcome to episode 4 of Talk Commerce.
There you go.
Boom, boom. And I found a new Alan Partridge show, which is quite hilarious. It's not This Is Alan Partridge. There's another one that he did.
Is it the one where it's the talk show?
Yeah.
Is it old? Is it old or quite recent?
They're both old, yeah. Is there a recent one?
Knowing me, knowing you with Alan Partridge.
Yeah, that's it. It's hilarious. So very painful to watch, but also very hilarious.
Yeah. I absolutely love Alan Partridge.
Yeah, so I could be Alan Partridge, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So Deryck Harlick, acclaimed Adobe trainer, Magento trainer. Oh, wait. Did I say acclaimed? I meant claimed.
Claimed by Adobe.
Yes, Deryck, please introduce yourself.
I am Deryck, acclaimed a Magento trainer. I'm a Magento trainer. Obviously, I'm at Magento, but I do a lot of training, the official Adobe Digital Learning Services training for Adobe. And it's all the kind of merchant, the ever side, not the developer side, the ever side, everything else on that.
Right, the light side. We're getting to the light. Yeah. It's what everybody gets to see. The dark side is what the developers work in.
Goes on behind
the dark caverns of code.
Behind closed doors in darkened rooms with flickering lights. Yeah, no, it's the other side.
You haven't ever wondered why in the Matrix they use a black background with green text that falls instead of a white background with black text that falls? It's because it's in the dark.
Okay.
All right, so moving on, you have a Millennium Falcon and a DB4 behind you.
I do, yeah. So that Millennium Falcon is, I think it's an original 1978 toy one that was bought for me by my mother-in-law for my 40th birthday. So it kind of it's in a terrible state. It's absolutely wrecked. But
wow.
It was because I told her that when I was a kid, that was all I wanted. You know, every Christmas it was kind of that was the thing I wanted. So when it came to my 40th birthday, that's what she.
Well, let me just tell you right now, you look really good for being 40 in 1978.
That's right. Yeah. That's the.
My dad turned 40 in 1978, and you look much younger than him.
Yeah, if only.
You really had no idea what you get yourself into when you started this interview, did you?
No, not. And do you know what it is? I should do, really, shouldn't I? I mean, I've known you long enough.
And really, knowing for me, it's 10 a.m. What time is it there?
It's 4 o'clock.
Oh, it's the same time here, but minus 6 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right, good. Well, moving along, now that we've got all those important things out of the way, let's talk a little bit about training today. And specifically, I think e-commerce training. I think Adobe is a good reference for us, but I think in general, merchants need training and they need it sooner than later.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And merchants, I mean, merchants should get training at the outset of the project before probably you've done requirements. That's my, I strongly believe that, before you've, you've done discovery and requirements is have some light training, just features training, whatever the e-commerce package is that the merchant's chosen to go with. There should be some kind of features training, just so then when it comes to requirements, there is an understanding of what the software is already capable of doing. So that's and when I've looked at projects that I've been involved in where that has happened, those projects tend to be the more successful projects, or they run the smoothest because the client has that innate understanding of what's going on and they kind of bought into it. So yeah, I think training is, adopt training early as far as, or certainly educating the client. It doesn't have to be training per se, but certainly educating the client on what it is you're going to be using to deliver the project, if you're an agency, that is. And if you're a client, you should really be, learning about if you're, a merchant, you should be learning about the software that you're going to be using before you dig deep into, your requirements, because you may find there's a feature that is a very costly feature to develop, but actually there's this feature over here that's good enough for now, that's not going to be so costly to develop, and you might put more priority on that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the 90% rule applies there, where if the feature covers 90% of your requirements and it's 90% cheaper than the other custom work, it
Yeah,
might be worth going with that feature and maybe changing your requirements a little bit to meet what the feature actually delivers.
exactly. And then you can have that intelligent conversation as well, as on both sides of the argument, which is, you can go with this feature which is native and does 90%, and that will cost you X, or you can still go with what you want, but that's going to cost you X. And there's that intelligent conversation there that can be had, and that informed conversation, let's put it that way. So they might still want to go with the more complex feature, but at least they've aware of what the significance of that is. And of course, there's conversations we've been having a lot lately, but the whole, you want to avoid, when you're, as best as possible, when you're building out a store, of doing any customization, just because the long, they might cost, I don't know, X $1,000 to build that now, but you're still going to have that technical debt for as long as you have that store. So you're building in future costs now for, again, it just comes back down to just training, understanding what you're getting into, what you're purchasing, what you're going to be using, and then trying as best to use that to your full advantage. And if not, then go customize it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And knowing, I think, upfront what they do, and then understanding the debt, let's call it the technical debt, or in terms of, say, Shopify or BigCommerce, there's going to be some cost taken on by the customization, has to be done by some middleware piece. And I think if you analyze the cost of building something in Magento, where it's a one-off cost and then some maintenance costs in the future, against either building that custom item for Shopify and then paying for the SaaS service fee on that item, you're going to be, at some point, you get very close to the same amount on both sides. So going back to your point, knowing upfront what you're getting yourself into, and then making an educated decision on, is this thing so important that I want to spend this much money over time? And from an ROI standpoint, will that thing that I'm going to build bring in enough money to pay for this over time? Because you just don't want to build it for fun. You want to, I mean, I guess you could just build it for fun. And I suppose there's parts of your website you would just build for fun. But the overall goal would be that this thing on your e-commerce site drives you traffic, which gets you conversions.
Yeah. You should be able to justify the spend on the future value of that. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
And I think some of the exciting things that you're doing now are more than just managing your Magento store or admin training. You're doing some requirements gathering exercises with clients. And I think some things that we're doing, some of the things we're headed towards are making sure that some of those processes are in place and documenting some of those things.
Yeah.
And then learning how can we find out what we need for this feature, and how can we get all the requirements as a merchant, or as a project manager, whoever, as somebody who doesn't know about coding, how can we get those? How can we get those?
I think that's it's a really interesting kind of, and again, that comes back to, the training up front is part of that, part of the training, or the learning that the merchant should be getting as well, is how to how to articulate those requirements. So how do they sit down with the product owner or the business analyst or whoever it is that they're doing the interview with them, and that person training the client or the merchant how to actually pass requirements over. What is the right method to do it? What is the correct approach, and how can we make sure that you pass that over in a way that as the developer we understand it, or as the requirements engineer we understand it, and then we can make sure that goes on to the developer in the right way. So I think that's kind of quite certainly in larger projects, that's probably quite a crucial part of the education, and it does all come down to this kind of top heavy right at the start of the project, a whole load of stuff that seems like it's slowing everything down, but actually it's going to speed the project up in the long run.
Yeah, and I, now having worked in some working with companies that are enterprise level companies that maybe they have teams across the globe, they do typically have some sort of written process. It may not be coherent across all funnels or silos, but they do have a process written out, and that is to aid them in that sort of, how do we translate this feature into something that needs to be developed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something any merchant would learn or could learn from what are the big enterprise companies of the world doing. And I could do the same thing. It's not rocket science. It's learning about what can the platform do, and then making sure that those requirements are delivered to a developer.
Yeah, and actually you're kind of then hitting on another, the next level after that is that, and then how's that get handed back to the merchant so that they can operate, they have the operating instructions, if you like, because every store is different, so they should then have their processes once it's up and running on, if someone comes into the sales environment, this is how you deal with a customer who wants to change their address. This is how you and you have those very finite procedures. Well, it don't have to be finite. They can be quite broad, but they could go very finite. And you have those all mapped out as processes as well for the client. And again, you'd expect to see that in enterprise level. You tend not to see it as you go down the chain. It tends to be, well, Dave showed me how to do this, and this is how I do it now. And there's not so much a documented procedure, but it's probably a good idea to have that.
Yeah, and I think you also see these documented procedures a pointer to look at the manual online. When that procedure is slightly different in your store because you have some customizations that are done.
Yeah.
And I think even the small bits that you can copy from the main manual and put it into your own procedure manual are really important to help the next person to understand how can they do this thing.
And that's it's the perfect starting point is what is the operating instructions in the Magento, we'll use Magento as the example, but obviously it'll be the same with all platforms. But what are the procedure? Take that and then sit with the team of people who are gonna have to use that procedure and write it in a way or customize it to be based on what they're doing in their organization. But it's a starting point, it's a perfect starting point, that and then and that highlights what it is, what do we need to document. And in fact, you could go through the whole manual and basically tick off, right, we need to document that, now let's generate that for this client. And again, I mean, we've done it in some respects, where we've kind of facilitated that for clients, where we've sat in the room and we're not the ones writing the procedure, but we can help them get to where they need to get to. So it's something that, again, I think it's getting more, it seems to be getting more popular. I think maybe because certainly in working on the Adobe sphere, because the clients are kind of going up the tree, it's less of the smaller clients now, so we're seeing a lot more medium-sized businesses, medium and large-sized businesses on it, rather than the smaller medium businesses, if you get my meaning. That there is a mindful that they need to document processes.
Yeah, and there is a need there is a need for smaller merchants to adopt that. And the best way for them to do it would be to simply look at the manual, decide what they're doing, and then adopt whatever that manual thing says into their own. If there's no changes, then at
Yeah.
least say we do it like we do it the standard way Magento says we should do it. We, for example, entering a product, we go through the product standard product entry mode. There isn't anything custom that's in it, or we upload a CSV and our products are there. But there could be specific cases where there's attributes that need to be filled in. There's attributes that have to be a certain way.
Yeah.
On the Magento side, it's knowing which attribute set this should be assigned to. That at a minimum, just making sure that the person entering the product knows which attribute set that it needs to be assigned to is very important.
Yeah. And I mean that's the thing is when you get to that kind of level, it's like, yeah, there needs to be a procedure there. But the other way that you can deal with procedures, if you like, is that you take the standard manual, whatever that might be, and you say, there's our procedures. And then what you do is, as you're operating your store, you then start highlighting exceptions. So you kind of following that and go, actually, this isn't working for us. We need an exception. So then you develop this exception. So you start off, you don't overcomplicate it. You go, do you know what it is? We're just going to use this, but we'll use it. And then we'll start highlighting where we have exceptions in what's going on, or something will happen in the business that generates an exception that needs a procedure around it. And that's that's also a good way of doing it. I don't want to say on the cheap, but in a way that is not really arduous at the beginning of the project. You can kind of say, this is going to happen, but it's going to happen organically. But we need a starting point, and that starting point is the out of the box manual, if you like.
Yeah, and the reality is that they need some education to know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have to read the entire manual up front, but there are important things that they need to read up front. And knowing where, I guess the first thing, knowing where to look, but also knowing what to look at first, helps them to get to a place where they'll be efficient in working in Magento. And that's where some training comes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, I mean, I obviously I'm biased because I do training, but I just don't think it could be underplayed at all. It really should be, no one should be let loose until they've had at least some kind of basic training. It's they should have a license.
Right.
But even the most even if it's just an hour or two of getting familiar with the interface and knowing what menu, because obviously we can on most platforms you can restrict what a user can actually do, so we can restrict that user, but they still need to have that basic knowledge. I think one of the things, certainly in my early days with Magento, one of the biggest criticism I would have of agencies was the assumption that the people who are going to be using the software had the same mindset as them, of exploring the admin and trying to find out things and just assuming that that's what everyone did. And so quite often a store would just be delivered and it goes, there you go, off you go and set up, and then they might get an A4 sheet of instructions on how to do something. I mean, it's actually 10 years ago this week that I delivered the first Magento training course with Maze Training, and it was like, and that was a 3-day course, and I just remember lots of kickback at the time, going, what are you going to cover in 3 days? It's how much is there to cover? It's like, well, I'm not targeting it at you, the developers. I'm targeting it at people who've never seen this or don't even know what half of the things on the software that actually does. So yeah.
It's interesting that you say developers, because there are a lot of developers that develop in Magento that actually don't know a lot about what the admin does in Magento, or they know the little pieces that they're working on, but they don't necessarily understand everything that gets put together and all the different parts and how they work. They would work, like you said, the letterhead, the letter style paper, or A4 as they would say in other parts of the world.
Different size.
Yes, a different size. um, they know that this does this and this does this, and as a developer, I'm always going to click this button. But as a merchant, no, none of that makes sense to me,
Yeah,
and I don't
yeah.
even know how to get to step one.
Well, I remember it was I did meet Magento in Romania, and Ben Mark. I think it was one of the first. It's quite early on in Ben Marks being the evangelist. And I remember him on the stage saying, to speaking mainly to developers there, is that, before you start writing your Magento code, you should read the manual. And he kind of held it. I think he held up the manual. It's like at that time it was about 1,000 pages, but that was the instruct. And he is absolutely right. It's like, as a developer, the number of times I've been around that sort of area where I've been training, and there was a feature that existed in that Magento store that had been built custom, and it's like, but if they'd gone to this menu and down here to this option, they could have used the out of the box function that the developer clearly didn't realize was there. So it was, yeah, he ended up getting overdeveloped. So that's that sticks with me, that though, that yeah, I think a lot of developers don't. I'm not saying that's true. Maybe certainly in obviously in partner agencies, I'm sure that's not so much true. But certainly back then, when it was a bit more like the Wild West, it was, I'm sure there were developers who had no idea of half of the functionality in Magento, and yet they were diving in and customizing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, there are thousands of agencies and hundreds of thousands of developers, literally, that they do 90% of their work on the community version, and they may not know or may not have had experience with the enterprise version of Magento or the commerce version. And maybe they don't know that that feature exists in commerce. And what we're seeing now is the divergence of features now for commerce compared to open source, where the Magento commerce will become more feature rich and open source will become more plugin rich, where you have to have a plugin to work on that. And what we see a lot of is clients that want to go to the commerce version of Magento. Then we back out some of those things. So that's really when we see a lot of that. But we also do see maybe a project manager who's new, who the client says, "Hey, I'd like to get reward points or gift cards or something that exists already in Magento Commerce." And they start, they just take the client's word and, okay, I'd like to get gift cards. And the client says, I found this great gift card module, and the project manager finds it on somebody's website, and then pretty soon it's installed, and then some architect comes across, or they say, why did you do this?
Yeah.
Which goes back to the importance of education.
Yeah, and I think, and that education, yeah, I mean, what you're saying there is that, yeah, I mean, the developer, the project manager, everyone involved in the project needs to be educated. I think as well, that situation is and that's really common, that the client driving the features, and obviously, the client should have the last say, but there really needs to be pushback from wherever possible. It's like, do you really need this feature? Do you really, is there not another way we can do this? Is there not something within Magento already that can do this? And like you say, open source versus commerce, surely there comes a point, if you've got open source, that you're doing so much customization, you've got so much technical debt again, that it actually makes more sense if those features exist in Commerce Edition, to actually switch your version and go down the Commerce route.
Yeah, especially when, if you're talking about B2B, that Magento Commerce has such great B2B features that it really makes sense going to the Commerce version for that. So just going back to the documentation, I think one of the things that's come up recently, or has come up in the past, is the idea of, what does this module do? And once you've moved on to the next agency or the next developer, how do they know what those do?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a real life problem I'm having at the moment, where I'm looking at a store that has got a whole bunch of extensions and modules that were generated by another agency, and we don't really have any documentation on it. So it's quite a it's quite a head scratch at the moment. But it really it's the last thing that happens, isn't it? It's the kind of, and then we'll document it, and actually, it's something that is really important, because Magento is getting upgraded all of the time. Things are changing all of the time. Stuff's going to good documentation is so key for it's not going to save us time today when we're building it, but it's going to save us time in a year's time, in 2 years time. So we should build that in. It should always be built in, really. But what's
Yeah.
your solution to that? Tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple thing, the simple thing, or the thing to start with, would be, hey, what does this thing do, and how is it, like, from a functionality standpoint, how is it done, and where does it exist?
Mm-hmm.
So you can know as a merchant, what does it do? What does it do? What is it supposed to do? How does it do it? Just how, like, on the front end, what does it do? And then from the back end, how do I modify that? Is there anything in the back end that I need to worry about? That could be done on an A4 piece of paper. Those things could be very simple. They don't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
But then where does it exist, I think, is the next thing that you have to ask. And that really has to be chimed in from a developer to say, this is existing in the vendor folder, it's a composer thing that gets pulled in, or it's sits in the apps folder. And it is written in this way. There's just some simple things that can be done from the module standpoint that a developer needs to do. And the next little piece that the developer needs to do is that it directly relates to this other feature. So there may be something you want to override the rules, your cart rules or your promotional rules, and you have a specific module that relies on promotional rules. And maybe in Magento 2.8, they have a complete overhaul of promotional rules. And now suddenly this really cool feature that's been working for 2 years stops working because this has changed, but you've gone through 7 different agencies since then.
Mm-hmm.
And again, back to real world, this is what we're seeing right now in version 1.9 or 114 or whatever version 1. People have had their Magento store for 12 years. And they have code in their Magento store that was written in 2008. Mm-hmm. So how at that point, how do you decipher everything that was in there without having some roadmap to get there?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I answered your question or I just made it worse.
Yeah, no, I won't sleep tonight. So no, I think you've just got to in this instance, we're just going to have to go through each of those modules in turn and work it out, and also the big question being, is it required? Do we still need require this? Is there something else better out there that does it? Especially with the custom modules, yeah.
Well, I know that we as Magento are going through this with a client now, and I think it's something that we could sort of template and then work on with every client, where I think every merchant should expect to have some review of their features every quarter. I mean, if you haven't added anything in that last quarter, then hey, let's not worry about it. But chances are Magento may have launched something, and is there anything new in that?
Yeah.
So
is one of the new features in Magento. Does that mean that now we can use that instead of and go back to core? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So at least having it on your meeting schedule to review features in your e-commerce store, and asking, is there anything new that's been added now? And is it at least as a minimum documented? And I mean, as a minimum, is there a line item that says this feature now exists in our little manual that we have? And then from there, having somebody write out what it does as a feature. Like it adds you add something to the cart, it adds a capital D for Deryck in front of every single product.
Yeah.
And then when you check out, everything is marked D something something. So in a year from now, when somebody is taking over the business and they're like, why does everything have a capital D in front of it? They'll know where it is, how to find it, and how to either correct it, or maybe they want to change it to a capital B for
You're possibly
Brent.
describing every training course I've delivered where there's lots of categories called Deryck's category and products called Deryck's products. And yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And they sell very well.
Oh, they do. Yeah. Yeah.
But when
they never get delivered though. Honestly, it's a cowboy outfit.
Right. I will say that A/B testing, though, I think the B ends up winning more than the D, since the D doesn't exist in A/B testing. So the Brents always win. So we're moving on.
We're going to get that tumbleweed graphic on the
doom, 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 doom. So I think every, a actionable item that you could take out of this conversation is at least ask the question every quarter.
Yeah.
And
I think that could be built into the, the account manager or project manager meeting. And yeah, absolutely.
One other small point on that is when Magento releases its next version, so 2.4.4 I think is coming out next, or 2.4.3, whatever the next version is. They don't necessarily say everything that was released in 2.4. They only say the things that were released in that increment. So 2.4.1 to 2.4.2, what was released in the increment. So when you have a client who's on 2.3 whatever the latest version of 2.3 is, and they know that this new version is coming out, 2.4.2 or 4, whatever the number is, they don't necessarily know everything that's encapsulated in all of 2.4. And if they're on 2.3.1, they don't know everything that's between that. So having a way, I guess the person doing the upgrade, some of their responsibility is to roll up everything that's involved in that upgrade, not just the latest features in the upgrade. And from my experience, it hasn't been that easy to find a concise place that says, here's everything that's in 2.4.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. Actually, I've never really considered it, but yeah, I tend to I always look at the release notes when something's coming out. But you're absolutely right; it just tells you what's happening in that particular version, not in the major update, just in the
And Magento is good at releasing their features in between the 0.0s and 0.7s or whatever, right? So like something could come out in 2.4.2 that's a completely new feature that's really cool.
Yeah, well, Page Builder didn't come out until 2.3.1. So 2.3 came out, and then the major thing about 2.3, which was Page Builder, didn't come out until 2.3.1. So
right. So that's something that a merchant needs to look at when they're doing that. And as an agency or as a developer, when you're doing that upgrade, you need to make sure that you're educating the client, coming back to education, you're educating the client on the fact that all these features exist, including all the features between whatever you're on and now.
Yeah.
So
is that a project someone's working on?
That is something somebody is working on that project here. Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah, that'll be quite useful.
All right. So, I kind of like this idea of this quarterly review and making it as simple as possible. So just some ideas, like your ideas on what a merchant should be asking at least quarterly from their developer or agency.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there isn't, I guess it depends on the relationship. But the merchant should be articulating what direction of travel they want to be going in with their site, so that the developer or the agency can actually then start thinking about ideas of how they can help that merchant get there. And My experience is that that tends not to happen as much as it should happen. I think, you know, it's up to I guess it's up to the you know, the solution provider or whoever, you know, to put the framework in place to allow that to happen. But at the same time, it's got to come down to the merchant to be able to, you know, to provide that kind of information. So the questions that should what should the merchant should be presenting, probably quarterly, what their plans are, what it is that they want to be achieving next. And that should then stimulate the conversation of, well, how can we help get you there? This is what we think you need, and then we can, you know, we can go out and research what it is that what it is that's going to help them get there.
Yeah, and it is a shared responsibility. Um, at the end of the day, it has to still be owned by the merchant, but a good agency also has the responsibility to educate the merchant on what you were just saying, because they may not know that they may not know the ins and outs of their e-commerce store and what it's doing.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that we've seen over and over again is some feature in the back end that exists that the merchant doesn't know it's there or doesn't know why it's there. It just makes something work. And then when you go to do an upgrade or you do a migration from a platform, they find out something doesn't work anymore that they inherently thought worked because it just worked.
Mm-hmm.
And they never communicated that to anybody, and nobody knew it existed because it was done 10 years ago, and now it's stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So back to education, back to documentation, that's where those little incremental things and asking that question every quarter comes into play for making their site work in the future.
But equally as important as well is education within the you know, within the solutions team. And by that I don't mean, you know, necessarily Magento or the e-commerce platform, but you know, we've had as an organization several times when we've had a partner come in and present to us, and I know, you know, lots of people out there will do the same. And that's fantastic, because you learn about something, and then you actually sometimes just can solve a client, you know, particular client's problem. You sort of like go, actually, that would be a perfect solution to deal with this situation, or, you know, when that situation arises in the future. The number of times that I've been on something like that where literally the next day a problem presented itself where that is the perfect solution for that problem. And so that's important as well. It's kind of like in you know, looking at the partner network and actually making sure you're fully up to speed as much as possible with what's happening in that partner network, because that's crucial as well. That's complete, you know, that's where the stuff that is going to make the difference is and exists. And as much as we're saying, don't, you know, try not to put extensions in, well, let's face it, we're going to put extensions in. Let's make sure that the best ones that can do the best job and are the ones that are built really well, and they've got the whole upgrade path, you know, that's all going to be dealt with, and we're fairly certain that that's going to be done in a responsible and way, and you know, and making sure that we know what's out there that we can then offer that to clients when, and actually the client may not even know they want it, but we should, you know, we can put ourselves in a position where we present that to them in a quarterly meeting or whatever. Have you looked at this product? This does this. It might do this for you.
Yeah, the reality of that statement is that this pertains to every single e-commerce platform, not just Magento. It's BigCommerce, Shopify, and actually, I would argue that it really pertains more to a SaaS platform where you have to have an external feature, and you really need to know what is the best one to add in. And that, by the way, that feature is going to cost you this much every month plus this much every transaction. So knowing what it does, how much it costs, there's so many more moving parts when it comes to a SaaS platform than it is in Magento. So as a merchant, just knowing those things, and then coming back to the simple documentation of, hey, we added this third-party SaaS for this reason, and here's what it does. Here's when we added it, and in that quarterly review, go back and somebody could say, well, why did we add in, you know, add a fire breathing dragon to every order?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
because of Game of Thrones.
yeah, and it's pretty cool.
Right.
But yeah, and if you can, if there can be a return on investment figure associated with that, even better. And that might be a negative figure, in which case, cut that. But we've got to try. And this is the thing: is like no two stores are the same. Everything is A/B testing. Everything should always be tested. Everything should always be measured wherever possible. And not everything could work, and what works for one merchant might not work for another, but sometimes we don't know that until we try. And I think it's also getting the merchant into that mindset as well. If they're not already in that mindset, it's getting them into that mindset where this is not an exact science. Not everything is going to work for everyone. So, when you add this button on these sites and you turn it green, normally it increases conversions by 50%, but actually in your sector it looks like it reduces it, but we don't know that until we try. So I think that's a really useful way to push the merchant, is to have them, if they're not already, is to have them in that mindset that, look, this is a work in progress, and you need to try stuff out, and you need to accept that sometimes things are going to break and they're not going to work in the way that we hope they would. But then sometimes something that we thought would only have a minor effect might go absolutely off the scale and have a really tremendous effect on what's going on. So again, as part of that education is getting that in there, because I'm sure you've had the situation where that there's certain, I can kind of think of certain people out there who basically think that IT is 100% reliable and should work all the time. And they bundle e-commerce into that, and they don't really accept that it's complex and it's hard, and there will be bugs and there will be problems and there will be things that need to be looked at and resolved. And that's the same as soon as you put an extension in it. Who knows what's going to, that we try and be as safe as possible, be as due diligent as possible, but there's always going to be some factors that are hard to take into account.
Right. There's scale, there's traffic volume, there's languages that are being added, there's the amount of SKUs in their store.
Yeah.
There's so many factors that need to be talked about. And I think you really hit the point. The merchant needs to be educating their developer or their agency on what would they like to do in the future. Just so the agency can give them the best recommendation based on what they know right now. So for example, if they said, we're going to get a ton of traffic, but we're only going to have 3 SKUs. Great. We'll build it this way. Yeah. And then a month later they say, oh, okay, thank you. We're getting 1 million hits a day, but now we want to add 1 million SKUs. Okay. Well, that changes the outlook. We're going to need more servers, and we'll need a lot more things, and we should change some of the architecture or whatever. We just knowing what they would like to do into the future. One of our past clients has been Universal Music, and I can remember an artist that did an Instagram drop or whatever they call it. And we were told,
kids, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm an Instagram drop. Yeah. I was born in 1978. No, I'm joking. We were told, oh, we'll get about 4,000 visitors from this, and we got 40,000. So, right. Having some, number one, getting some advanced knowledge is great. So you can at least be prepared to scale up. But that's an indication of something that's compressed. Like, we're also talking about, what do you want to do in a year, so we can help you get there.
Yeah. And that could completely change the approach that you're taking today. If we know that in a year, 18 months down the line, that this is what the aim is. So yeah, that's really important that we get and that comes down to, it needs to be a partnership. It can't just be master and slave, if you like. It needs to be actually, yes, you're employing us, but we need to operate in a way that there's full transparency in that respect.
Exactly. All right. Wow, that was a quick hour or almost hour that we've gone through. So,
Did we
what?
mention training?
No. What? Why? This is the time for our shameless plug.
Oh, I'll do a shameless plug. Is on the 27th of April, which is part of the Adobe Summit, is that I'm running a 2-hour it's a 2-hour training session. It's an introduction to managing your Magento store. So it is if anyone out there's got merchants who are considering, or they've got maybe new people in their team who are just starting out in Magento, it's the ideal kind of course for them. It's a leader on to then there's follow-up courses that Adobe Digital Learning Services run as well that go into much more detail, but it's a good introduction for 2 hours. So yeah, so 27th of April, pick your time zone because it'll be whatever time it's on. I think it's on 6:30 in UK time, 6:30 in the evening UK time. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
all those sessions are recorded. And
yeah.
I know that so I'm participating in some kind of Adobe Insider thing. There'll be some discussion groups made. I think it's called Brain Dates.
Yes.
So there's going to be all kinds of excitement around the Adobe Summit this year for everything to do with Magento and Marketo and Experience Manager and all the other Adobe products. Not so much Photoshop, but
And they're not doing, they'll be doing Photoshop. Oh no, they do a different summit for that side of the business, don't they?
I think you're right. Yeah. But anyways, it is very exciting, and it's super fun to see you there.
Yeah.
And
All
yeah,
virtually. Yeah. But I mean, that is the great. It is all free this year, which is fantastic. I mean, I know my wife's a teacher, teaches media study, and she's getting her kids to sign up to a lot of the a lot of the sessions around. I mean, like Dan Levy's going to be there, so they're signing up to that and things like that. It's great. It opens it up. It opens up the whole conference to a whole audience that just would never be able to come for practical reasons, but also just that it's probably not ideally suited for them, but it gives them a great introduction to it. So yeah, I think it should be fun. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for this episode number 4 of Talk Commerce. Do. We'll probably have we'll come up with some better music.
No, I think that's perfect.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of disappointed with my singing there.
Well, practice for next week. And
exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Deryck, and have a great evening.
Yeah. You
afternoon.
too, right? Yeah.
Cheers.